Welcome to the ASU Democrats versus Republicans. Today we have a special guest on our show, Democratic candidate for Attorney General Felecia Rotellini. Thanks for joining us today,
It's my
Felecia.
pleasure. Great to be here.
So our first question is, on PBS's Arizona Horizons, earlier this month, you focused on your opponent, Mark Brnovich's, you thought Mark Brnovich focused too much on criminal prosecutions, which you said was not the primary job of the Attorney General, and that he was too much of an ideologue. I think it would be a good start to our conversation by getting a clear sense of what exactly your ideology is and what issues that you will be advocating for and drawing attention to inside and outside of the courts.
Well, first off, the Attorney General is the lawyer for all of Arizona, the top law enforcement officer, and one of my goals is to take politics out of the Attorney General's office, which frankly means taking ideology out of the Attorney General's office as well. When I'm Attorney General, I'll be an independent watchdog for all of Arizona, and I know this can happen because when I was in the Attorney General's office for 13 years, I worked under both Republicans and Democrats. The job of the Attorney General is to do what's in the best interest of Arizona, the people. And I'm going to focus on the real public safety issues, and that does include border crimes, going after the drug cartels at the border, and being more organized than the organized criminals. I'm going to also protect our kids by going after sex online predators and make sure that all of the state agencies are giving our agencies all of the state agencies are getting good advice and counsel from the assistant attorney generals. And then I'm also going to make sure we go after domestic violence and consumer fraud. That is one of the most important jobs of the Attorney General, is to go after consumer fraud, financial fraud, make sure our seniors are safe, and make sure investors don't lose their life savings through scam artists.
Mm-hmm. So both Mark and yourself emphasize a need to reduce partisanship in the Attorney General's office, less politics, and want to focus on battling cartels and protecting the children, all of which are valiant goals to strive for. I think that's a given, but they're kind of non-controversial issues that every Attorney General typically fights for. What are the key differences between you and Mark and your plans to tackle these issues? What separates you two on these issues that you surprisingly have agreement and consensus on?
Well, I can tell you my opponent has never prosecuted financial fraud, has never gone after consumer fraud, has never returned millions of dollars to victims of fraud. And that's one of the key differences, is that I have a 17-year uninterrupted record of results. I was the lead lawyer for the state against Arthur Anderson on the failed audits of the Baptist Foundation. That was a Ponzi scheme where 11,000 people lost their life savings. We were able to return $217 million to those victims. So I can hit the ground running in the most important areas that the Attorney General's office handles, and that's on the criminal side, white-collar fraud, organized fraud, and on the civil side, consumer fraud.
So is there any particular legislation, either from members of the Arizona House or Senate, that you would support and that you look to advocate for if and when you get elected, regarding child protection or consumer fraud?
In the area of child protection, we just had a piece of legislation passed that changed the whole agency from Child Protective Services to Department of Child Safety. Mm-hmm. And they actually took the general counsel position away from the Attorney General and put it in that agency. But there's still over 100 lawyers in the Attorney General's office that go into court every day for Child Protective Services and this new agency, advocating for termination of parental rights, adoption, dealing with domestic violence and child violence. And so my job will be to make sure that those lawyers are well mentored, have the support and supervision they need so they can make decisions every day in the best interest of the kids. So I'm waiting to see how this new agency works and make sure it's more effective than the former agency.
But you're in support of the new agency and kind of the new responsibilities that they've taken on.
Yeah, I believe that the general counsel job in the new agency, we'll see how that works, and we'll see how that independent part of the general counsel position works, and I'll work with that position and work alongside, because truly, as the Attorney General, I am representing that agency.
And so you do very much see your role and responsibilities primarily outside of the courts and not prosecuting, hopefully, for the executive office?
Well, actually, the Attorney General is in court every day on the executive side. In fact, when I was representing the departments of insurance, banking, and insurance, I was in court all the time. I have hundreds of hours in hearings, trial work. I mean, I think that this is one of the fallacies that my opponent continues to pursue. I have done jury trials in the private sector. He has not. I have hundreds of hours in the civil side going after scam artists, doing direct exams, cross exams. He does not. And every day, the assistant attorney generals, 400 plus, are representing every state agency in court on the civil side. Let's say the Department of Transportation is sued for highway design. It's assistant attorney generals who are defending them in court. Or a state agency is sued for employment discrimination. There is a group of assistant attorney generals, many in fact, who would be the ones to defend that state agency in court. When I was representing the departments of insurance, banking, and real estate from 1992 to 1996, I was in court all the time, whether it was a license revocation case or defending a motion in Superior Court or at the Court of Appeals.
Okay, great. So we're gonna change the topic of conversation a little bit. So with Colorado and Washington already having decriminalized marijuana, and many states, including Arizona, creating citizens' initiatives to legalize it, what are your views on marijuana legalization and its impact on the state? If elected, would you support it if it makes it into the ballot in 2016?
If it makes it on the ballot in 2016, I will support the will of the people, and I will let it go to a vote, and I believe it will. My law enforcement background puts me in a position where I am not in favor of medical marijuana. All of the sheriffs, all of the county attorneys, the law enforcement community that endorses me, and I have the endorsements of the entire sworn law enforcement community, is not in support of medical marijuana. That's why it needs to go to the people. And here's my job. If it passes, then my job is to make sure that we have order in the way that it is sold, and that we make sure that there are legitimate businesses being run under healthy regulations, and that it's taxed, and it brings in revenue to the state. I think that the train has left the station on that. I think the best thing the Attorney General can do is not saber rattle and not threaten to sue everybody if it passes, but to work with our state agencies and the new regulatory bodies that will inevitably be created to make sure that we do it right.
So what do you think about marijuana's impact on crime, given that internationally countries like Portugal or the Netherlands, which have legalized it, have seen drastic decreases in crime, or even within our own borders? I mean, in Washington and Colorado, there's been a positive impact not only on the economy but also on crime levels because marijuana has been decriminalized. What do you think about that and its possible positive impacts on it?
Well, I think we do need to look at what's happened in the states of Washington and Colorado and Arizona. I think there's some statistics that are being developed along those same lines in those states. And I think we need to take the best practices from those states, if Arizona passes a decriminalization law, and make sure we also get those benefits.
Okay, so
yeah, I mean, the statistics are the statistics, and I don't have anything to dispel them. And I think one of the issues that I think is pushing the medical marijuana decriminalization is that there are a lot of folks in jail that had possession of marijuana, and because of
it's a
our
criminal
laws,
justice system as well.
our
criminal
laws
justice issue as well.
have been created. There are mandatory sentencing laws. There are require the prior laws that have put folks like that in jail. And so I think we need to look at our whole criminal justice system as well as the laws we pass to make sure that we're putting the worst of the worst in jail. We have deferment courts for drug courts, veterans courts, courts where we can work with folks who have post-traumatic stress disorder and drug addiction problems, help them with their social issues, their behavioral health issues that have put them on the wrong side of the law. I think that's part of the job of the Attorney General too, is to be a leader on all of these issues.
So as you said, if the voters do put it onto the ballot and vote for it, you would be in support of marijuana decriminalization.
Well, that would be the law of the land, and that is the job of the Attorney General.
But you wouldn't fight it.
Now, I think that if it's on the ballot, I'm going to let it go to the ballot, and I will let the people decide. And it is not going to be my position at this point to fight it. I can't tell you what will happen in the future because I believe that the law enforcement community will continue to have very big concerns about it. And I think that as the top law enforcement officer, both sides need to air their differences. We see that on all the propositions, and then we'll go from there. My job will be to enforce the law when it becomes law.
Okay, great. So on Horizons in 2010 on PBS, you said that SB 1070, some would argue is an anti-immigration bill, you said that it did not go far enough and that you would like to go further with it if elected. Do you still hold that same position?
You know, that was a statement I made in connection with the fact that Governor Brewer even said in 2010 that SB 1070 did nothing about border security, did nothing about drug cartels, and nothing to stop human smuggling and drug smuggling. And SB 1070 was really about undocumented people being in our state and whether they were criminals or not. So that was what I meant by that statement. I was on record against SB 1070, and I believe it was one of the key issues that caused me to lose the race because right before Election Day, Mr. Horn did a hit piece on me, and there it was up front and center that I was against SB 1070.
So you're in support of some of the ideas and the goals of the legislation, but not the actual passing of the bill that was proposed?
The bill that was passed was an emotional reaction to a failed policies by the federal government. And the problem with our federal agencies not being responsive to law enforcement when undocumented persons were arrested, and because it's the 100% jurisdiction of the federal government, ICE wasn't showing up soon enough, and the local law enforcement community felt that their hands were tied. SB 1070 unfortunately divided the community, and the United States Supreme Court determined that the parts of SB 1070 that were trying to regulate federal immigration were unconstitutional, but they also found that any law that is trying to protect the citizens within the border of the state is constitutional. The issue, though, is you cannot racially profile when you're pulling someone over. So that's where I think the law is that if the law works, you can't. There's a provision in SB 1070 you cannot racial profile. So that I believe is the best part of that law.
Okay, and so a lot of Democrats are pro-immigration and are for amnesty, and it seems like you take a harder approach when it comes to border security than most of those on your party. Why would you say that is?
I believe that the Senators McCain and Senator Flake, their efforts to get a comprehensive immigration bill are to be applauded, and I support the plan that they've put forward. It doesn't include amnesty, but it includes an ability for these millions of folks to come out of the shadows, to get an identification, to have a criminal background check, and then to get some kind of permit that allows them to stay in the country, but they have to follow the same plan as everybody else, the same rules and regs and protocols to become a citizen. And I think that that is a fair way to do it.
Okay, so my last question regarding immigration is, would prosecuting and making immigrants leave the state be one of your primary issues if elected?
My primary issues are going to be the law enforcement issues relating to Arizona.
Okay.
And that will be the financial fraud, protecting our children, protecting our seniors, going after domestic violence, going after public corruption in government, regardless of who is, regardless of political party. I have a whole election reform bill proposal to clean up our election system, to create more transparency when it comes to independent expenditures and attack ads. With respect to the immigration issues, that is the purview of the county attorneys and local law enforcement. That's where SB 1070 and laws like that are executed. My job as the Attorney General, which is one of the things I tried to bring up in all of the debates, is that the job of the Attorney General is to go after white-collar fraud, financial fraud, and statewide issues of statewide importance that bring back hundreds of millions of dollars to victims of fraud. And that's why I have the endorsements of all the law enforcement community, including the Police Association of Phoenix, PLE, that were the big proponents of SB 1070 in 2010. And that's why all of the major newspapers have endorsed me and have said, I'm not an ideologue, I'm not any kind of ally to any particular political ideology, and I have the best experience.
Okay, so AZ Central reported just a few days back that the Attorney General has a role in overseeing the Corporation Commission, which is something not a lot of people necessarily know about, specifically in making sure that any rules passed are clear, concise, and understandable within the Commission's authority to make. It's come out through IRS documents that APS has donated thousands of dollars to Mark's campaign and wants to have a catbird seat in the Attorney General's office to fight for it and its interest. What is your stance on environmental regulation and the future of energy in Arizona and standing up to big corporations like APS?
I'm glad you asked that question. I am on record that if necessary, I would be willing to take an action against the EPA. I am against the EPA's rules called the Clean Power Plan because they are they're rules that really go beyond the authority of the EPA as prescribed by the Clean Water Act. And they have a very draconian, disparate treatment on Arizona when you compare it to the way these rules are being applied to other Western states. It's bad for our economy, it's bad for job creation, and we need to either be able to negotiate with the EPA on how their formulas and rules will apply to Arizona, or if necessary, I would be willing to sue the EPA or defend our state against the EPA regarding those rules. The APS issue is very disappointing. If you look at my record, I have been an independent voice for consumers, for transparency in government. I believe my election integrity plan would create rules that would require Arizona corporations to disclose what they're doing in independent expenditures. And so I think that my administration would be independent, and I think that's one of the reasons why the largest utility and monopoly in Arizona has decided to actually pick a winner and to support my opponent who is on the same side with them in many issues.
So, I think there's this broad consensus among scientists and geologists that climate change is occurring, and it's something that will impact Arizona specifically. And there's been a lot of investment into solar energy. Is moving towards alternative energy sources not something that you support, or why is it that you are vehement in suing the EPA and the stances that they want Arizona to take?
Actually,
given that they're trying to work towards climate change.
If I was vehement about suing the EPA, then APS wouldn't be putting all that money into Mark Brnovich.
Yeah, it does seem almost like hypocritical.
Yeah, I have met with the stakeholders, both on the environmental side and on the energy side. That's what I believe is the best part about my leadership is if you look at my past experience, I'm a coalition builder. I've put the stakeholders in the room that are opposite on issues, and we've worked out solutions. And you can look at my background in cleaning up the mortgage industry as an example. I believe that we must look at renewable energy. We must look at solar.
But we don't want to be restricted by the EPA.
Right, which is, and we need common sense policies with respect to solar. And again, I think that the Arizona Republic recently reported that the rules allowing renewable energy and solar are rules that the Goldwater Institute sued over to get rid of. They lost. My opponent used to be at the Goldwater Institute. And again, I believe that's one of the reasons why APS has picked a side. I think it's unfortunate and disgraceful. They don't need to pick a side, but they have because they want to be able to get what they want done in the Attorney General's office, and I think they know I'm more independent.
And you'd be willing to fight against them should you need to?
I'd be willing to fight against anyone who doesn't put Arizona first. The job of the Attorney General is to be the lawyer for the people. That means I have a duty, an ethical duty as a lawyer of competence and loyalty to you, the people of Arizona. And Arizona is a state of diversity. It is a state with many multiple special interests. And the job of the Attorney General is to be a mediator. The job of the Attorney General is to be an advocate for consumers and to enforce the consumer laws, the civil rights laws, our disability laws, and our environmental laws, and represent the Department of Environmental Quality. What gets lost in this discussion is that my client will be the Department of Environmental Quality. And it's the Department of Environmental Quality, another executive branch agency, that will make the call about suing. I don't believe the Attorney General has jurisdiction on his own or her own to sue anybody. They have to have a claim, a good faith claim in the court system. So when I'm Attorney General, I'll work with the Department of Environmental Quality, my client, I'll advise them, they'll advise me on the impact.
But they'll be making the choices.
They'll be making the choice. If they say,
Yeah.
hey, Felecia, Attorney General, we need you to sue the EPA, I have no problem with that.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about your campaign now. In a country and in a state that's deeply divided along party lines, it comes as somewhat of a surprise on both sides of the aisle, particularly Republicans, of course, that you've garnered the support and endorsement of over 200 high-profile Republicans, including former attorney generals, governors of the state, etc. Why is it that so many Republicans are throwing themselves behind a longtime Democrat like yourself? And do you think it has more to do with your opponent and his supposed shortcomings, or your own efforts and initiatives?
I believe it's about my efforts and initiatives. When I was hired back in 1992 to the work in the Attorney General's office, I was hired by a Republican, and I represented agencies run by Republicans that were appointed by a Republican governor. My 17 years shows working across party lines to get things done. And if you look at my background, it's about protecting and serving. Never ran for office before. I am not a career politician. The only reason I am a politician is Webster's dictionary would define me as such. Otherwise, I'm doing it because the Attorney General's office needs to be in the hands of a prosecutor, in the hands of someone who will not be an ideologue, who will always make the best decision in the best interest of the people. And if you're colored by politics, if you're colored by ideology, which I believe my opponent is, he's on record saying he'd be a pro-life Attorney General, that is not the law of the land, and that is not what we should be focusing on in the Attorney General's office. That tells me he's going to push an ideology. That's not in the best interest of the people of Arizona.
Is there anything about your secret sauce that you would like to tell us about in terms of trying to convince and persuade Republicans and those on the right to support someone like you who is on the left?
If you look at me, if you look at my DNA, if you look at my background, I grew up in a small town in Wyoming. My parents did not go to college. I'm a first-generation college graduate. I grew up in the West. I am very independent in my approach towards decision-making. That's why I have so many business communities supporting me, like the Chandler Chamber of Commerce, the Tucson Chamber of Commerce, businessmen like Jerry Colangelo endorsing me. It is the fact that I have always put the people first, and my intent has always been public service first. And that's why I believe the law enforcement community knows my motivation and knows that I will always take politics out of the decision making and put the people of Arizona first. And if you look at my opponent's history, where he's worked as a lobbyist for the private prisons, for a very extreme think tank, you see someone who doesn't have any bipartisan support, who doesn't have independence for Mr. Brnovich or Republicans. He only has that extreme right-wing folks supporting him. That's how he got through the primary. And that's not in the best interest of Arizona. In fact, it's wrong for Arizona.
Okay, so we're going to end the show on a note of bipartisanship, hopefully. So one of our show's stated goals is trying to reduce the gridlock and partisanship by creating conversations between those on the right and the left. We want to see more bipartisanship in action in the legislature. So I wanted to hear some specific concrete ideas that you have to reduce partisanship in Arizona and remove some of the politics which you have said is one of your aims in office.
Yes, I will have a business roundtable that will be made up of Republicans as well as Democrats in the business community that will advise me on a regular basis. I will have a faith-based advisory committee, which brings all of the different values and philosophies of the faith-based community to the table. I will have a senior fraud group that will be senior experts in senior fraud as well as lawyers. These are all bipartisan groups that will be advising me and helping me to target the right fraud and to represent all of Arizona. The taxpayers' funds are limited, and the Attorney General has to be a good steward of taxpayer money. So I'm going to focus on the crimes that are the worst crimes, the scams that are the worst scams, and focus on protecting and serving Arizona as efficiently as possible. Those are the way I believe we can build bipartisanship. I will go down to the legislature and work with the Republican leadership. I won't send my lieutenants, I'll go down there. And I got to tell you something else. One of the reasons why I think the Attorney General's office sometimes doesn't get along with the legislature is there is a natural competition. It doesn't really matter. Influence and power and future political endeavors and ambition. I am running to be Attorney General. There's a running joke that Attorney General stands for, the acronym AG stands for Attorney General, but it also stands for Aspiring Governor. And there have been these rumors that I'm running to be Attorney General so I can be governor. I've never thought about that. I'm running to be Attorney General. And if the Attorney General, like Terry Goddard did, who I believe was very bipartisan in his approach to the office, if the Attorney General is making decisions that are about the Attorney General, that is, this is what the Attorney General should be doing, not an aspiring governor, I think that takes some of the partisanship down a notch or two, and it will be an office where there's more collaboration and cooperation. I am the most pro-business candidate in the race. You can look at my background and experience, and that's why there are so many business community folks, Republicans in the business community that want to see me as the one making those kinds of decisions in that office.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today and having a conversation with me.
You've been an awesome interviewer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next ASU Democrats versus Republicans. This is Nihal Krishan signing off from the Cronkite School.